Some moments occur outside the machinery of history, witnessed by a handful, discussed in whispers, and later dismissed as impossible. Encounters too precise, too symbolic to have transpired in the disorder of ordinary reality. Muhammad Ali and Bruce Lee never shared a ring, never trained together, never inhabited the same competitive universe. Yet according to accounts that surfaced years afterward, they once stood face to face in a room devoid of cameras, journalists, or any apparatus designed to preserve what transpired. Ali was at the zenith of his power then, a man whose physical dominance had transcended sport and become political theater. His face appeared on magazine covers not merely because he fought, but because he fought while speaking, while refusing, while insisting that his body belonged to him in ways the world preferred to contest. He moved through spaces with the unhurried certainty of someone who understood that gravity itself seemed to negotiate with him before acting. Lee was smaller by every conventional measurement, yet his presence operated on a different frequency entirely. Where Ali expanded to fill a room, Lee compressed it, drawing attention inward rather than projecting it outward. Those who worked alongside him recognized something uncategorizable in his movement, a precision that seemed to eliminate wasted motion at a level approaching the molecular. He was not yet the posthumous icon that would emerge after his death, but the initiated already sensed they were watching something that defied existing frameworks. The details of how they came to occupy the same space remain disputed. No recording exists, no photographs document the scene. The location itself became a matter of conjecture, though most agreed it was neither public nor staged. A space borrowed or improvised, somewhere both figures happened to be for reasons unrelated to each other. Some claimed it was a private gym. Others suggested a studio backlot. The contradictions may be deliberate, a collective decision by those present to preserve ambiguity. Ali arrived first. This much appears consistent across testimonies. He entered without entourage, without the usual architecture of handlers and admirers that typically surrounded him. Witnesses later recalled the strangeness of seeing him alone, stripped of context, just a man in a room waiting for something undefined. Lee entered perhaps 10 minutes later. The witnesses reported that the two men did not immediately acknowledge each other. There was no rush toward introduction, no performative display of mutual respect or rivalry. They existed in the same space for a duration before either spoke, each aware of the other with the acute sensitivity of predators, recognizing a peer. When the conversation began, it emerged without preamble. No one present could later agree on who spoke first, which suggests the exchange was organic rather than deliberate. The early remarks concerned technique. Ali spoke about reach, about the geometric advantages conferred by height and wingspan, about controlling distance. Lee responded with observations about speed, about the neuromuscular pathways that govern reaction time, and about collapsing distance. Neither man raised his voice. The dialogue possessed the calm, almost clinical quality of professionals discussing their craft without the distortions of ego. Yet beneath the surface civility, witnesses sensed something else, a mutual assessment occurring in parallel to the words, as though each sentence served dual purposes: communication and reconnaissance. The room was small, concrete floor, high ceiling, industrial lighting that casts hard shadows. Someone had pushed equipment against the walls to create an open space in the center, though no one could later recall who had done this or when. The air carried the particular silence that precedes events of consequence. At some point, the conversation shifted. One of them, accounts differ on which, suggested a demonstration, not a fight. The term sparring was never used. What emerged was a proposal to test certain claims, to verify theories through application. The language remained abstract, almost academic, but the implications were unambiguous. They moved toward the center of the room, neither removed clothing nor prepared in any formal sense. There was no referee, no agreed-upon rules, no defined beginning or end. What followed existed in a category that resisted classification, neither combat nor performance, but something suspended between intent and restraint. Ali adopted a stance that appeared deceptively casual, hands low. Weight is distributed with the looseness of someone confident in his ability to respond from any position. His eyes remained fixed on Lee's center mass, ignoring the hands, the feet, the dozens of potential vectors from which an attack might originate. It was the gaze of someone who had learned to read bodies as unified systems rather than collections of limbs. Lee's posture communicated the opposite philosophy. Everything compact, everything prepared. He had eliminated the transition between thought and action. His hands hovered at a middle distance, neither committed to attack nor defense, maintaining what practitioners of his method would later term formlessness. He watched Ali's eyes, his shoulders, the minute shifts in weight distribution that telegraph intention before the body complies. The silence that preceded movement stretched across time in ways that defied measurement. Those present later struggled to quantify it. 3 seconds, 30 seconds, longer. The disparity suggests that the moment operated outside normal temporal experience, that each witness inhabited their own subjective duration while observing the same objective event. Ali moved first. Not a punch, but a feint. A subtle shift of the shoulder suggesting an attack that never materialized. Lee did not react. He remained motionless, as though the feint had never occurred, or as though he had perceived it and dismissed it as inconsequential, in a span too brief to require physical response. The pattern repeated with variations. Ali would initiate some fragment of motion, and Lee would remain still, offering nothing to react against. The witnesses described it as profoundly unsettling, this refusal to engage with provocations that would have triggered responses in any conventional exchange. Stillness itself had become a form of pressure. Then Lee moved. The descriptions of what followed suffer from the limitations of human perception, attempting to process events that exceed normal parameters. Some witnesses claimed they saw a hand technique, a straight thrust directed at Ali's centerline, stopped inches from contact. Others recalled a kick, low and invisible, until it had already completed its arc. The contradictions suggest that Lee executed multiple movements in rapid succession, or that observers, watching from different angles, perceived different fragments of a unified action. What remains consistent is that Ali did not block or evade in any conventional sense. He simply was not where the technique arrived. He had relocated through minute adjustments that accumulated into displacement. His upper body had rotated perhaps 3 inches. His left foot had shifted backward by a similar measure. The economy of motion was extreme, almost invisible, yet sufficient to render Lee's precision irrelevant. They separated, not through any mutual agreement, but through a simultaneous recognition that continuation would require escalation. Neither seemed willing to pursue. The witnesses reported that both men appeared unsatisfied, as though the exchange had answered certain questions while generating others more profound and more troubling. The conversation resumed in a different register. The clinical detachment had dissolved. What emerged was something rawer, a discussion of death, of the ultimate stakes that underpin all martial disciplines. Ali spoke about fighting men who wanted to permanently erase him, about entering rings where the objective was not merely to win, but to survive. Lee responded with observations about the distance between choreographed violence and the real article, about knowing the difference while inhabiting the former. At some point, the conversation turned to hypotheticals. If they fought for real, if the stakes were absolute, if every advantage and disadvantage were accounted for. The discussion never produced conclusions. It circled the question without answering it, as though both recognized that any answer would diminish them. One witness later recalled that Ali said something about weight, about the immutable mathematics of mass and collision. Another remembered Lee responding with a comment about vital points, about targeting vulnerabilities that render weight irrelevant. Neither statement was delivered with hostility. They were observations, data points in an equation neither man could solve. The meeting ended without ceremony. They did not shake hands or exchange farewells that anyone could later recall. Ali departed first, moving through the exit with the same unhurried certainty he had brought to the encounter. Lee remained for a brief interval afterward, standing in the space they had shared, his expression unreadable to those who claimed to observe it. In the days and weeks that followed, neither man spoke publicly about what had occurred. When asked directly, both deflected with humor or vague acknowledgement. Ali would sometimes grin and say that Bruce was fast, very fast, without elaborating. Lee, in the few instances when the subject arose, would note that Muhammad was exactly what he appeared to be, which could be interpreted in multiple ways or no way at all. The witnesses, when they eventually came forward, years later, in some cases decades, offered accounts that contradicted each other in specifics while agreeing on the essential strangeness of the event. Something had happened. Something had been tested without being resolved. Two philosophies of human potential had encountered each other in a space too small to contain their implications. Skeptics dismissed the entire narrative as fantasy, as the predictable mythology that accretes around larger-than-life figures. They noted the convenient absence of evidence, the suspicious dramatic structure, and the way the story seemed engineered to frustrate a conclusion. Believers pointed to the consistency of certain details, to the reluctance of witnesses to embellish, to the very mundanity of most descriptions. No flying kicks, no knockout blows, just two men testing boundaries in a borrowed room. What cannot be disputed is that both figures went forward carrying something unspoken. Ali would continue to dominate until his body rebelled against accumulated damage. Lee would die young, before his full potential could be measured, leaving behind questions his films could never answer. Neither ever definitively addressed what had or had not occurred between them, as though maintaining ambiguity served purposes that clarity would betray. The story persists in the margins of both their legacies, neither confirmed nor entirely dismissed. It surfaces periodically in biographies and documentaries, always hedged with qualifications, always presented as rumor rather than fact. Those who were present, if indeed they were present, if indeed any of it occurred, carried it differently. Some spoke of it openly in their later years, seeming to care little whether they were believed. Others took it to their graves without confirmation or denial, as though silence itself had been the price of witnessing something not meant for public consumption. The truth likely resides somewhere in the unmappable territory between what happened and what was later remembered as having happened. Memory distorts. Witnesses project. Legends require maintenance to survive. Yet beneath the accumulated mythology and skepticism, beneath the contradictions and convenient absences, there persists the possibility that two men who redefined human potential once stood face to face without cameras or crowds, and in that unrecorded moment, measured something in each other that no audience would ever be permitted to quantify. The room where it allegedly occurred no longer exists, if it ever did. The witnesses have departed without leaving depositions that satisfy the historical record. What remains is the story itself, resilient, mutable, impossible to verify yet equally impossible to completely discard. It endures not because it answers questions about who would have won, but because it preserves the question itself in amber, forever unresolved, forever suggesting that some encounters exceed the metrics we use to measure them.